ألفينا عليه آباءنا أولو كان آباؤهم لا يعقلون شيئا ولا يهتدون. صدق الله العظيم وصدق رسوله الكريم. So the verse that I just recited was verse 170 of Surah Baqarah. We'll do the translation and then we'll go into the explanation of the verse, inshallah. So verse 170, and when it is said to them, follow what Allah has sent down, they say, instead we will follow that which we found our fathers on. Even if their fathers used to understand anything, nor were they guided. And verse 171, the example of those who disbelieve is like the one who hears nothing but a call and a cry. Deaf, dumb and blind, they do not understand. So last week we looked at the verses around eating halal and staying away from that which the shaitan inspires. There's a little bit to cover from last week still, so I'll just quickly cover that from verse 169. Next Friday. Okay. Now, khutuwat is the distance of a step, so not even obeying him to that much where we follow him even that little bit, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned that all he wants to do is inspire us towards evil. And the words used were su'in and fahsha, so that which is evil and that which is reprehensible, so something that is so disgusting. And that's what shaitan wants from us. That's how he wants us to obey him. So when we act in a immodest way, when we behave in an immodest way, when we get into committing sins, then we've got to know that this is part of the obedience of the shaitan and disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's a slight difference that the ulama make between su' and fahsha and fawahish. And su' they class as minor sins or sins, and then fawahish as those major sins. That's a slight difference that they make on this verse, but often it's used interchangeably in various places. So the word innama ya'murukum, that phrase there is talking about waswasa, so inspirations from shaitan and how he inspires us to commit evil. And the thing is that it's very easy to defeat the shaitan. It's very, very easy to defeat the shaitan. Yeah. It's hard for shaitan to trick us, because we're not back in the Adam alayhi salam's time where shaitan comes and says, oh, eat this apple. Yeah. He dresses it up now, he has to. We're very aware of his tricks, and his tricks are very, very. They're not that clever. Yeah, his tricks are he'll call us towards something, and he'll glamorize it. Yeah, he'll dress it up with all the worldly beauty and all the worldly to get our desires going. Yeah, all we have to do is hold fast to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded us. We know the answer, and the answer is within us. We know the answer. We know we've been raised with the answer, right? Of following Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, following the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and disobeying the shaitan. But he'll glamorize it for us. Yeah, so he'll dress it up in a way that looks so attractive and so beautiful for us that how is it hard for us to resist? But but as soon as we start building that tolerance where we can say no to the shaitan, it becomes second nature to us, where obeying him is harder than disobeying him. And the other thing that this is the bit that leads into the verses that we're going to talk about today. That one of the things that tied into the last two verses about eating halal and staying away from that which the shaitan inspires was one of the amals of the mushrikeen of Makkah was that they used to release an animal into the wild, right? And they'd release this animal in the name of whatever idol that they had. And then they'd say that this was haram to eat, this was haram to touch, this was haram to do anything to, and this animal was allowed to graze freely anywhere. But they sacrifice, well, it wasn't a sacrifice, but it was almost a homage that they used to pay. But this was made in the name of someone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the verses that we're going to start on today. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again is calling us to obey Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And that's where our success lies. But when this call was given to the mushrikeen, what they said was, we don't want to follow the call of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, rather we want to follow the call or the practices that we found our forefathers on. And we're going to stay on those practices. And Allah refers to their position and reminds them that their forefathers were people who were jahil. Their forefathers were people who la yaqilun. They didn't understand. Yeah, la yahtadun. They weren't guided. Yeah, so their forefathers were these kind of people who were completely misguided, completely lacked any kind of understanding, lacked any kind of intelligence. Remember, at the time, the mushrikeen of Makkah were so unruly, so backwards that no one wanted to rule them. No one wanted to rule them. Blood feuds would go on for centuries, just between families. With the coming of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there's two famous tribes in Medina, the Aus and the Khazraj, and these two tribes were at war for years and years and years. And the trigger point for their war was something very minor, but the bloodshed continued between them. It was only with the coming of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam that this bloodshed and this war between the two tribes was brought to an end, and they lived as brothers. And it was the only thing that brought that harmony and brought that coexistence was Islam and the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. But when the mushrikeen were called on these things, they refused, even though they could see it they could see it right in front of their faces, the effect of Islam, but they refused the call. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes their call in verse 171, and describes the way they hear the sound, so the way they interpret the sound, or the call to Islam, is they interpret the sound as just any cry, just some random sound that they're hearing, comparing them like an animal. So when we call an animal, the animal doesn't really understand us. Yeah, and this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referring to them as. They're people who just hear a sound. They hear a cry and a call. They don't really understand what this call is. So their behavior in terms of refusing the call to Islam is that of an animal. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes them as deaf, meaning that they don't hear the message. Even though they hear the words, they don't hear the message. They don't take that message. That message has no effect on them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called them dumb, because even though they know Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam to be the truthful one, they used to call him al-Amin, the truthful one, before the advent of Islam. So they knew him. He was raised amongst them. They knew his character. They knew his trustworthiness. The people used to leave their amanats with him. But despite that, they remain dumb because they won't speak the truth. They're not ready to come. They're not ready to say the shahada. They're not ready to accept the message. And they're blind because even though they can see the effect in front of them, they're not ready to let that effect penetrate them. There's one thing that's falsely used in this verse. You hear it amongst quite a few young, enthusiastic brothers. You get a little bit too carried away, and where they start mentioning about following the forefathers, right? And they falsely attribute this to taqleed, yeah, meaning taqleed in one of the four fiqh mazhabs. And this is what in fiqh terms we call qiyas ma'al fariq, is something that's complete, that they're attributing one thing on, and they're taking an analogy from that, but the thing that they're using as the basis for that analogy, the asl, is completely separate to what they're applying their analogy on. Because the thing about this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls their forefathers ignorant, forefathers completely jahil, yeah, and they weren't guided, yeah. So this is the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes their forefathers. But we know of all the four fiqh mazhabs that the fuqaha arba, they were some of the most well-educated scholars of Islam that there's ever been and there ever will be. So to say that we're following someone who's ignorant, or we're following what our forefathers did, and comparing that to taqleed al-shakhsi in fiqh, then is completely false, because we know from the works, we know from what their contemporaries said about them, that there weren't these people who didn't understand, there weren't people who didn't know, there weren't people who weren't guided, because we know about their knowledge, yeah, we know about their abstinence, we know about their love for the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And the word aql here as well clearly shows, la yaqilun. So these people who were the forefathers of the mushrikeen, they had no understanding. But those people, those fuqaha arba, we can see how they codified the deen, how they derived for us the usuls that we can now use no matter what challenges we face, no matter what new masla comes. They've given us the usuls and the basis for us to do that. They're almost like chefs in a kitchen, right? They've cooked everything up, presented it beautifully on a plate, and just said to you, come on, eat. They're even putting the spoon up to your mouth. All we have to do is reach out and, take a bite. That's the amount of work that they've done. And the other thing is, the text here refers to those people who've never received any revelation, yeah? And nor do they have because they haven't received any revelation, they're not guided. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hasn't guided them. But the fuqaha arba, they had the Quran, they had the Sunnah, yeah, in front of them. And from there they were able to derive all the masail, they were able to derive the usul for us. So the other thing to mention is that when we follow the interpretation of one of the fuqaha arba, what we're actually doing is we're not following that person, we're not following his sunnah, yeah? We're following his understanding. Whenever everyone does taqleed in some way or another, right? Everyone, even the person who says, I'm not someone who does taqleed, they do taqleed. Because the moment you say here, okay, act on the Quran and Sunnah, it sounds really nice, right? Act on the Quran and Sunnah. That's all you need, Quran and Sunnah, Quran and Sunnah. Very nice, yeah? Now, when we come across the main reason for differences is because there's slightly different narration. So for example, a very minor issue which we all look at, a very minor issue, rafal yadayn, so raising the hands, how many times you raise your hands in salah. Now there's hadith to say that you raise your hands at every takbir, including the takbirs of sujood. Yeah, there's hadith to say that you only raise it at the beginning. So you've got this contradiction in the hadith. Now how do you interpret that, and which one do you act on? So someone comes and says, follow Quran and Sunnah. Bukhari says, Imam Bukhari rahmatullahi alayhi says, do takbir at the start, do it at ruku, do standing up from ruku, do it at those points. Great. So now what we've actually done is first I've followed this person who's told me to do what Imam Bukhari rahmatullahi says, and then I've done taqleed of Imam Bukhari because that's his opinion. So so I'm not accessing the sunnah myself. What I'm doing is I'm following this person to follow this person. So why should I follow the interpretation of this person who's alive, who will still have prejudices? Yeah. Why should I follow him when I can follow one of the greatest mujtahids that ever lived? Whether it's Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Shafi, Imam Malik, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahmatullahi ajma'in. So whoever it is, as long as we stick to the usul of those mazhabs, we're okay inshallah. Because through them we can access the sunnah, because the sunnah is very complicated. It's not as straightforward as you just pick up a translation and that's it, I'm a mujtahid now. Verse 172. O you who believe, eat from the good things we have provided you, and be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if you worship Him alone. In verse 173, He has forbidden you carrion, blood, the flesh of swine, and that upon which other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's name has been taken. Whoever is compelled by necessity, neither seeking pleasure from it or transgressing, then there is no sin on him. Indeed, Allah is most forgiving, the very merciful. So we started in verse 168 about eating halal and tayyiba before we got a little bit distracted last week. So here again, verse 172 is reminding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding us that to eat from those things which are good and pure. Yeah. So eat from those things that are halal for us, those things that we've bought with halal wealth. But this is also a refutation of the mushrikeen, because I mentioned that parable, this animal that they used to release into the wild and let it roam around. So we'll see how this fits in as well. So what the mushrikeen used to do is they'd make something that was halal, like this animal, and they'd make this halal thing haram on them. And they'd make those things that were haram, halal. So they were quite happily drinking blood, they were quite happily drinking alcohol. Yeah, these kind of things were their actions. Here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us that haram, whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has classified as haram, remains haram. And whatever is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has classified as halal is halal. So whatever is halal is whatever is pure and good is halal, and whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has classified as haram remains haram, and it's eternally haram. And we can't chop and change whenever we like. And there's, apart from the sins, there's certain spiritual effects that the eating haram has on a person. And these eating haram creates inside a person evil characteristics. It creates inside people characteristics that are unnatural. And this is one of the things about eating swine. For example, it'll create this lewd kind of behavior. A swine is a very dirty animal, and it creates this dirty behavior inside a human being as well. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses the prophets, Ya ayyuha rusulu kulu min tayyibatin wa'malu salihan. Yeah, and this is backed up by this ayat. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses the prophets and He says, eat from the pure things and do good deeds. So the two things are linked. So eating pure and doing good deeds, the two things are linked together, because eating pure allows you to do good deeds, whereas eating impure and eating filth and eating haram and sustaining your body with haram, that leads to fawahish. There's in verse 173, there's this, it starts, إِنَّمَا حَرَّمَ عَلَيْكُمْ. Yeah? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made haram on you This innama harrama, yeah, this is what in Arabic would call, this is what's called a restrictive clause. So it only makes haram, it restricts what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made haram on the four things that are going to come after, on the things that are going to come after it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions four things here. And He mentions the four things: blood. Sorry, first He mentions the dead animal, so maita. So anything that has died of natural causes, blood, swine, and other things that otherwise would be halal, but because someone else's name has been taken on them when they've been sacrificed, they become haram. So these four things. Now, the way this verse is phrased, someone could falsely assume that only these four things are haram and nothing else is haram, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used this restrictive clause, innama, yeah? But the theme of this verse is not to establish all those things that are haram, but it's to refute the claims of the mushrikeen, because they thought these four things were halal. And because they thought these four things were halal, or whether they knew they were haram, they made them halal on themselves. Right? It's not to exclude all the things that are haram, but it's this verse refutes the claims of the mushrikeen. Yeah, so that's the purpose of this verse. The purpose of this verse is not to list every single haram thing. Now, just a few things about these four items that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned. First of all, karyan, maita, dead animal. Yeah. Now this is any animal that hasn't been slaughtered. So zabah hasn't been done. Any animal that hasn't been slaughtered. So this can be, someone might have hit it on the head with a hammer and then the cow died, as is done in a lot of slaughterhouses nowadays. It might have died from choking. So some slaughterhouses nowadays, they gas the animals, yeah, they gas chickens. It might have died from drowning, which is one of the problems that I mentioned with, with chickens and the stunning, the way they stun the animals. They stun them upside down on a conveyor belt in an electric bath. Sometimes the animals die from drowning. So this could be included. This is also maita. So any animal that's hit with, falls and dies, this is maita. Any animal that dies just because of old age, this is all maita, and this is all haram on us. So this is all haram on us. Now, it's haram for us to eat, it's haram for us to buy, it's haram for us to sell, it's haram for us to even feed to another animal. So if we took this dead animal and fed it to the dogs, then that would be haram for us. It's haram for us to nourish ourselves, because it's haram to give haram to something else. Does that make sense? So it's haram to give haram to someone else, whether the person is Muslim or not Muslim. So we can't give something haram to someone else. Yeah. So one of the things you'll see in a lot of our Asian restaurants is at Christmas time they give a bottle of wine to their regular customers. Yeah. Might not drink the restaurant owner might not drink wine themselves. They might not normally sell wine, but just because it's Christmas, they want to give a gift to their customers, so they give them a bottle of wine. Now that is haram, because what they're doing is that's a sinful action, because what they're doing is they're making it possible for someone else to sin. They're assisting someone else to sin. The only dead thing that's halal for us are those, the maita of the sea. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says in a hadith of Ibn Majah, it's reported by Ibn Kathir rahmatullahi alayhi, two dead things have been made lawful for us: the fish and the locust. Yeah. So if an animal, a fish, as soon as you take it out of the water, you don't need to do zabah to a fish, yeah, because it's going to die because you've taken it out of its climate already. So that becomes halal for us as soon as the fish dies. Once we take it out, you can't just naturally. If you find a fish that's been dead in the water and is rotting, you can't just eat that. Imam Jassas explains to us that fish that's been dead in the water and it's rotting, that thing is haram. But everything related to maita is also haram. because it's najis. The other thing is blood. Blood in itself, as it is not haram and it's not najis because it's inside us. Yeah, it's inside us. While it's part of our human body, it's pure. But once it exits the body, yeah, this is called adamul masfuh. So flowing blood. Flowing blood. Once it exits the body, then it becomes haram. Then it becomes najis. So for that thing, we can't eat, we can't drink. Often, this is one thing that we've got to be careful of. Because I remember in school as a child, if you got a cut on your hand, something like that, your teacher says, quickly suck the blood. Yeah. So we've got to be really careful and make sure our children know that it's not just to start sucking the blood if you cut our hands. Yeah. And so it's the damul masfuh that is najis. So if someone scratched their hand, for example, and there was red, but the blood didn't actually move from the mouth of the cut, then that wouldn't break the wudu. The only time the wudu would break was when it moved from the cut and it started to flow. So eating and drinking blood, this is also haram. One of the famous dishes for people in this country is black pudding. You know, they fry a clot of blood, or a clot of pig's blood. Yeah? So they fry that and then they eat that. Just the sound of it sounds disgusting. Yeah. But when that blood exits the body, it contains a lot of impurities and it contains a lot of harmful effects on us. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has called this najis for us, and it's haram for us to eat. Also, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the word lahmul khinzir here. It's very interesting. All these other things, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't mention lahmul mayta, you know, the meat of the dead animal. But here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions lahmul khinzir, and not just khinzir in itself, because every single part of the pig is haram. So it's not we shouldn't misunderstand it. It's lahmul khinzir and say, okay, it mentions the meat, so the bones are jais and the hairs jais, for example. The thing here is, the reason Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions lahmul khinzir is because even if we do zabah to a pig, nothing of that animal will ever be jais. Yeah, nothing of that animal will be jais, even if we do zabah to an animal. And this is very something that we need to understand now, that especially because we're coming up to flu season. Yeah, there's a vaccine for children. The flu vaccine contains pig gelatin. So something that we need to be careful of. Unless our child is really sick, then there's no excuse to allow him to have that medicine, because really a fit and healthy child, very little risk of them catching flu. Yes, if they catch flu could be serious, but there's very little risk of them catching flu in the first place. Yes, they'll get a cold, but this vaccine won't help with a cold. Yeah. And the final thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes mention of here is that animal sacrifice for other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when someone does a zabah and he mentions someone else's name other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then this comes under the hukum of mayta, even though they've done zabah. But because they mentioned someone else's name, this becomes mayta. And this also happens when it's also considered mayta when an act of shirk takes place at the time of zabah. So someone might say Bismillah Allahu Akbar. So they might say that, but then they'll add on someone else's name. Yeah, Bengali is very famous, or Baba Shah Jalal. Yeah, they'll add that onto it. Yeah, so yes, I'm not trying to ridicule a great personality. Yeah, the point that I'm making is that we shouldn't exaggerate. We have love for these great personalities of from our history, but we shouldn't exaggerate and take them to be at a level that they're not. And this is what some people do, is they will take their creed, they will take their, sometimes they'll take that love for their shuyukh beyond which is jais. And that's the thing that they need to avoid. Same thing with nazar. You know, if someone takes a vow, but they don't take it in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's name, they take the vow in someone else's name, they take the vow to please someone else. Yeah? That same thing becomes an act of shirk. Because Islam is a very practical religion, and Islam is a very practical way of life, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, after laying out these conditions of what's haram and specifying to us that don't go near these things, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He allows us some leeway here, where He says, whoever is forced, yeah, not out of transgression, not out of rebellion to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but out of dire need, then in that situation, then where there's genuine zarurat, when there's genuine necessity, then eating something haram will become permissible for that person. So if a person's actually starving to death and is on the brink of death, in that situation, then that person could eat the flesh of swine to save his life. But he wouldn't be eating so much because he likes it. You know, he won't be eating so much so he fills his stomach. He'd only eat that much that will fit, you know, make sure that he doesn't die. And the other thing to understand here is that the pig hasn't been made halal for him. It hasn't been made halal. Rather, the sin, it remains haram, but it's permissible for him to eat, meaning that the sin's been uplifted. So he's not going to get sin for eating that thing that's haram at that time. The fuqaha add a few conditions around the muttarra, the person who's forced, yeah, and the conditions that they add are that the thing itself is halal. The thing itself, there must be some certainty that it's going to help, and this applies in the same way when we use modern medicines, because a lot of modern medicines contain najis items, that contain haram items, like we find with a lot of cough medicines that contain alcohol, for example. Modern medicines do contain these things. So in order for us to use this haram thing, then we've got some conditions that we need to make sure that these are fulfilled before we can use it. So we've got to be certain that this is going to be helpful. There's got to be no other halal and pure alternative. If there's a halal alternative, then why go for the thing that's haram? Yeah. If there's already something that's halal and it's going to help, then stay away from the thing that's haram. And we've got to be using this medicine, or we've got to be using this haram thing for the sake of saving our life or finding a cure. We're not doing it to simply take pleasure out of doing the thing. Yeah. And you only use that much that's necessary. You don't go beyond what's necessary. So they're the conditions that are stipulated when for the person who's forced, the person who's compelled to use this haram item. So there is some leeway for them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has always, whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places restrictions, He always allows us this practical, you know, the deen is practical. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us this way of living. So first and foremost, we preserve our lives. We preserve the deen, inshallah. We finish there.